Okay. His point was that Mark Carney, after the big kerfuffle in Europe involving Greenland and the anger with Donald Trump, began to talk. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister in Canada, began to talk about the middle powers taking matters into their own hands, creating their own international institutions, fostering international law, and having a much bigger impact on the world stage. Okay, is that a fair representation of your question? Yeah. Let me just say what's going on, a little bit more about what's going on here. Trump is a unilateralist like we have never seen before. He hates multilateral institutions and the rules that go with those institutions, and he hates international law. He also hates domestic law. He hates the Constitution, right? But we're talking about IR, right? He hates international institutions because institutions are rules, and rules are used by the Lilliputians to tie down Gulliver, and that's no good for him. He wants to dominate. He wants to be free to make decisions. He doesn't want rules, laws, institutions getting in the way. So the word multilateralism is anathema to him. Now, this is a remarkably foolish policy from an American perspective. You want to understand, we created these institutions, we wrote the rules, we wrote international law, and we wrote it in ways that played to our advantage. And every one of his predecessors understood the importance of these institutions and these laws. So he is an anomaly, and it's just an indicator of what a radical he is. Okay, but he is what he is. So Mark Carney says the United States is not going to do the job, right? It's trashing institutions, not nourishing them or building them. So we middle powers should get together and build alternative institutions. We should have more sway. It's just not the way the world works. The great powers basically run the system. The great powers build institutions, whether you're China, Russia, or the United States. And the fact is that Canada just doesn't have the weight to really create institutions and act in an independent way that makes the United States unhappy. And you want to remember that Carney, shortly after he had this blowout with Trump, went to China, and he played kissy face with the Chinese, and he's talking about forming a nice trading alliance with the Chinese. And Trump told him in no uncertain terms that if you go too far down this road, I'll choke you to death, right? You just can't do that. And what you want to understand is the United States is an incredibly powerful country, not simply because of its military might, and in fact, I would argue mainly because of its economic might. I miss this one. Let me just tell you a quick story, which I think is very important and very relevant here. During the unipolar moment, when the liberal IR theorists were in charge, okay, they created this highly interdependent global economy. And the belief was that it would foster peace, love, and dope, because everybody would be hooked into this highly interdependent economy. We'd all be getting rich, we'd all be getting prosperous, nobody would ever start a war. And it was one of the principal theories, this is economic interdependence theory, it was one of the principal theories that informed our thinking, U.S. thinking, during the unipolar moment. Well, the unipolar moment went away, we moved into this multipolar world. And what you end up with is this tightly integrated network, economic network, this big web. And who's sitting at the middle of the web? Uncle Sam. And everybody else in a very important way is dependent on Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam quickly comes to understand that economic leverage that it has can be used against every country on the planet. Just think about, I could go through this, I won't, chapter and verse, just quickly. Ukraine, I could tell you a story. The Biden administration was enthusiastic about the Ukraine war. They did not try to avoid that war, and the reason is they thought they could use economic sanctions to throttle the Russians. just Biden understood. Trump understands. We have tremendous leverage because we operate in this highly integrated world economy.
Let's get to a few more questions. Thank you. Over here we had, first you, sir, and then in the back. Go ahead.
Going back to Ukraine, based on the idea you want other people to fight for you, should we provide more aid, more support to Ukraine?
Ukraine is a really good example of this, and a number of European leaders have basically said we should fight to the last Ukrainian, which I find kind of morally sickening. I mean, this is actually what we're doing. The Ukrainians are going to lose this war. I could lay that out for you. They should have quit a long time ago for their own good. The language that's used to describe the demographic situation in Ukraine is that it's in a demographic death spiral. It's in a demographic death spiral, and we're encouraging them to throw bodies into the meat grinder when they're going to lose anyway. God, morally reprehensible, but people make that argument. And it is you correctly point out, that's the buck passing argument. You don't see these Europeans fighting and dying over there, right? The British, French, and German leaders, they're really enthusiastic about them continuing the war, but that's because their people are not dying. Your question is, should we give them more assistance? The truth is, we didn't have more assistance to give them. This is the big problem that Trump is going to run into in the Middle East. This is what General Kane told him when Kane told him not to go to war against Iran. He told him that we did not have the inventories of weaponry. This is all a result of the unipolar moment. We don't have the weaponry. And from a Ukrainian point of view, at this point in time, the amount of armament that we're now using, plus all the stuff we gave to Israel before we went into Iran, and they're now using, we're going to have to replace, right? It's not a bottomless pit. But the other thing is, you could have given them more weaponry, and it wouldn't have mattered. The Russians have more people, and the Russians have a highly potent industrial base. They did not run down their industrial base. We did. By the way, if you look at the scenarios on a war against China in East Asia, war against China in East Asia, this somewhat contradicts what I said before. We do very well for the first month. Then we begin to run out of weapons. And the Chinese, like the Russians, have a huge manufacturing base. They can pump out huge numbers of weapons. Just getting back to this gentleman's question, we should have given more weapons, more assistance to the Ukrainians, there's a certain element of truth to that, in the sense that you just burn through weapons at a remarkably rapid pace. Just Tomahawk missiles in the Iran war. We have 4,000 Tomahawk missiles total. 4,000 total Tomahawk missiles. You can burn through 4,000 Tomahawk missiles in 2 weeks. Again, this is what General Kane told Trump. Trump thought he was going to end this one quickly, right? You don't end this one quickly, it begins to drag on. Big trouble.